Anthony Fauci is likely the most powerful physician in the history of this country. He's one of the forces behind the mass quarantines that tanked the economy and put millions out of work. He says it's worth it, though, because the threat is just so profound. So profound, so imminent, that you should wear goggles and stop shaking hands in the name of science. So it's interesting in light of that, the one thing that Anthony Fauci doesn't seem concerned about at all are the riots going on, the mass protests where thousands of people are crowded in together, touching each other without goggles. Fauci was asked about this on Capitol Hill today. Watch.
Should we limit the protesting?
I'm not sure what you mean. How do we say limit the protesting?
Should government limit the protesting?
I don't think that's relevant to...
Well, you just said if it increases the spread of the virus, I'm just asking, should we limit it?
Well, I'm not in a position to determine what the government can do in a forceful way.
Well, you make all kinds of recommendations. You make comments on dating, on baseball, on everything you can imagine. I'm just asking you, just said that protests increase the spread. I'm just asking you, should we try to limit the protest?
No, I think I would leave that to people who have more of a position to do that. I'm just making a statement that's a broad statement that avoid crowds of any type, no matter where you are.
No limit to protests, but, boy, you can't go to church on Sunday.
What was the...
I don't know how many times I can answer that. I'm not going to opine on limiting anything. I'm just going to tell you...
You've opined on a lot of things, Dr. Fauci.
Yeah, but
Wow. Finally, a member of Congress capable of asking a follow-up question, and he's absolutely right. There's nothing that Dr. Anthony Fauci won't opine on as long as it doesn't offend the popular, the fashionable left. Sex with strangers online, no problem. Shaking hands, bad. Every day for the past several months, virtually, Dr. Fauci has advocated for a new coronavirus policy. Here he is, on tape, doing it earlier this month.
I can say as a public health official that I would urge the leaders, the local political and other leaders in states and cities and towns to be as forceful as possible in getting your citizenry to wear masks.
Oh, so he is willing to weigh in on specific responses. Government response. What a fraud this guy is. Put on your mask, get off your powerboat, put on some goggles, do it for public health. And by the way, the consequences don't matter. They're just inconveniences, he explained.
I know it's difficult, but we're having a lot of suffering, a lot of death. This is inconvenient from an economic and a personal standpoint, but we just have to do it.
Oh, we just have to do it. Really? Fauci is 79. But maybe if he had like 22-year-old kids who are trying to make their way in this world, in an economy that is headed down the tubes, thanks largely to his recommendations, he would feel differently. It's not merely an inconvenience when your economy collapses, it's the end of the American dream. That's not a small thing. Maybe it's worth it, maybe it's not. But if it is, then you probably shouldn't take a pass on the question, are protests and riots okay? Unless you're a total fraud, like a complete fraud. Buck Sexton's been watching all of this very carefully. He hosts the Buck Sexton Show, and we're always happy to have him on. Now look, Buck, especially in the case of Fauci, who we've interviewed, always seemed like a nice guy to me. Not a stupid guy, impressive bio and all that, but you want to believe that he's making recommendations purely on the basis of the science. If he was, don't you think he would have said something about the protests?
Well, absolutely. We've known all along that Fauci's a bureaucrat, but today he really sounded like a Democrat, and that makes people really uncomfortable because put aside for a moment, anything else, if you're Dr. Fauci and you get the opportunity to tell people, if you're as concerned as he clearly is about this virus, where he's willing to do all those things you said, push for lockdowns, push for mandatory masking. I mean, we've gone from no masks to suggested masks to mandatory masks in the blink of an eye, and now he has an opportunity to tell everybody, look, no mass gatherings, and yes, that includes protests right now, and he won't touch it. It couldn't be any more clear that this is exactly the same bias that we saw from the beginning of this from public health officials who, by the way, in some cases, some of the experts you see going on TV were saying, oh, it's good for public health that there are these protests because Black Lives Matter. That's what they were saying.
So in Northwest D.C., which may be the most democratic neighborhood in the United States, literally, there are signs, and I'm quoting, that say, "Thank you, Dr. Fauci." He's a political figure now, it seems to me.
Well, this continues with a trend where the left, the Democrat Party, elevates any government figure that they find useful for bashing Trump, right? So we're supposed to believe, federal agents are stormtroopers. They're bad right now because of Democrats. But Dr. Fauci, we call him Saint Fauci in some quarters, cannot be questioned. And I would just want to know, how is it that Fauci also doesn't weigh in on all the people at John Lewis's funeral yesterday in Georgia going back to D.C.? Tucker, they're supposed to go into quarantine for 2 weeks, aren't they? I don't think anyone believes that that's going to happen because rules are for little people.
That's totally right. The death of equality. And we see it at John Lewis's funeral. Oh, the irony. Buck Sexton, great to see you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tucker.